The cantina on Zephyr Station buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries from across the galaxy. The air hung thick with smoke from exotic substances and the chatter of dozens of alien languages. In the darkest corner, where the lighting barely reached, sat Al, a battle-scarred warrior whose chitinous armor bore the marks of countless conflicts. His forearms moved with practiced ease as he cleaned his plasma rifle, each motion deliberate and methodical. The weapon had saved his life more times than he could count across 3 decades of warfare. Other patrons gave him a wide berth, recognizing the predatory grace of a veteran killer. The Galactic Council had been at peace for nearly 2 standard years now, but Al knew better than most that peace was just the pause between wars. He'd fought in the rebellion, survived the siege of, and witnessed the fall of the. His reputation as one of the galaxy's most feared warriors was well-earned through blood and sacrifice. A group of young mercenaries occupied a nearby table, their blue skin gleaming under the artificial lights as they boasted about their latest contract. Their leader, a cocky pilot named N, had been growing louder with each drink, regaling his companions with tales of easy victories against primitive species. "The Terrans are next on our list," N announced, his voice carrying across the cantina. "Some backwater species that just discovered faster-than-light travel. The hegemony wants their system cleared for mining operations." His companions laughed, clinking their glasses together in celebration of what they assumed would be another simple conquest. They had built their reputation on overwhelming less advanced civilizations with superior technology and numbers. Al's mandibles clicked in what those familiar with behavior would recognize as amusement. He'd heard whispers about these Terrans, though most dismissed them as unremarkable. The old warrior knew better than to underestimate any species, especially one that had achieved interstellar travel. "Easy pickings," another chimed in. "I heard they still use projectile weapons, primitive chemical explosives against our plasma technology." N nodded sagely. "Their ships are crude, barely holding together. We'll sweep through their defenses like they're not even there." The laughter grew louder, drawing annoyed glances from other patrons. Al continued his weapon maintenance, but his 4 eyes tracked the conversation with growing interest. He'd learned long ago that overconfidence was the deadliest enemy any warrior could face. A trader at the bar spoke up, his reptilian features twisted in disdain. "The humans aren't even worth discussing. They've only had space travel for a few decades. What threat could they possibly pose to the hegemony?" This comment triggered another round of laughter and increasingly elaborate boasts about how quickly the Terrans would surrender. N stood, swaying slightly from the alcohol, and raised his glass in a mock toast. "To the shortest war in galactic history," he declared. "We'll be home before the next lunar cycle." The celebration continued, but Al had heard enough. He carefully reassembled his weapon and secured it to his back before standing to his full 3-meter height. His movement created a subtle shift in the cantina's atmosphere as conversations quieted and heads turned. The old warrior approached the table with the measured gait of a predator. His carapace caught the light, revealing old plasma burns and projectile impacts that spoke of hard-won survival. The younger mercenaries fell silent as his shadow fell across their table. "You speak of war as if it were a celebration," Al said, his translated voice carrying the weight of decades of combat experience. "I have fought in more conflicts than you have seen rotations of your." N's confidence wavered slightly, but alcohol and pride made him bold. "What would you know about the Terrans, old one? They're primitives who barely escaped their own gravity well." Al's 4 eyes fixed on the young, and for a moment the cantina seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. "I know enough to warn you against underestimating them," he said simply, "but youth rarely listens to wisdom." The trader laughed harshly. What could humans possibly do against the combined might of the hegemony? Their technology is centuries behind ours. A slow smile spread across Al's mandibles, though the expression held no warmth. "Technology alone does not win wars, young fool. I have seen species with advanced weapons fall to those they deemed inferior. The Terrans possess something far more dangerous than superior technology." "And what would that be?" N challenged, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. "They are warriors," Al replied, his tone growing serious. Not soldiers, not fighters, but true warriors. There is a difference that most of the galaxy has forgotten. The cantina had grown increasingly quiet as other patrons strained to listen. Al's reputation preceded him, and when a veteran of his stature spoke of warfare, wise beings paid attention. I have studied their history, the continued. They have never known true peace. For thousands of years, they have fought constant wars among themselves. They have refined the art of killing to a degree that would shock most civilized species. Scoffed, though the sound lacked conviction. Primitive tribal conflicts, what relevance do they have to modern warfare? Al's laugh was a harsh, clicking sound that made several patrons step back. Primitive. They created weapons capable of destroying their entire planet before they achieved interstellar flight. They have fought wars that consumed entire continents and killed hundreds of millions of their own kind. The silence in the cantina was now complete. Even the background music seemed muted as the old warrior's words sank in. But that was before they unified, the protested weakly. They're peaceful now, part of the galactic community. Peaceful? Al's 4 eyes glittered with dark amusement. They have been at peace for less than 50 of their years. A blink of an eye for a species that has been perfecting warfare for. Do you truly believe that instinct simply disappears? He leaned forward, his massive frame casting the table in shadow. I have read their military manuals, studied their tactical doctrines. They plan for wars that we cannot imagine. Every human child learns mathematics through the calculation of ballistic trajectories. Their entertainment glorifies conflict and sacrifice. The young mercenaries shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What had started as casual boasting was becoming something much more serious. Their very language reveals their nature, Al continued relentlessly. They have hundreds of words for different types of killing, thousands for various weapons and tactics. Other species develop poetry and philosophy. Humans develop new ways to destroy their enemies. En found his voice again, though it cracked slightly. Even if that's true, we outnumber them millions to one. The entire hegemony stands against a single planet. Al straightened to his full height, his carapace gleaming ominously in the dim light. Numbers mean nothing if you do not understand your enemy. The humans have a saying that perfectly encapsulates their nature. He paused, letting the tension build before delivering his final warning. They say that the most dangerous thing in their universe is a human with nothing left to lose. You are about to attack there, threaten everything they hold dear. You will create billions of humans with nothing left to lose. The old warrior turned to leave, but stopped and looked back over his shoulder. When your war begins, remember this conversation. Remember that you were warned by someone who has survived 3 decades of galactic conflict. The Terrans will not simply roll over and surrender. They will fight with a ferocity that will haunt your dreams if you live long enough to have any. With that ominous prediction, Al walked away, leaving behind a cantina full of beings who were no longer quite so certain about the coming war. The celebration had died completely, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that stretched long into the artificial night. Outside the station, hegemony war fleets were already gathering, their commanders confident in their overwhelming superiority. They had never faced humanity in battle, never witnessed the terrible creativity that desperation could unleash. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson that Al had tried to teach them. Some species were predators by nature, but humans were something far more dangerous. They were survivors, and survival had taught them that any weapon could be turned against an enemy, any sacrifice justified in defense of what they loved. The war was coming, and despite their primitive technology, despite being outnumbered, and the humans would be ready. They had been preparing for this moment since they first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be waiting for them in the darkness. 3 days after Al's warning, the first hegemony scouts entered human space. The brief reports they transmitted before losing contact spoke of impossible defensive networks and weapons that conventional understanding. But by then, it was too late to heed the old warrior's advice. The galaxy was about to discover what humanity was truly capable of when their very existence was threatened. Admiral Orr of the Hegemony Third Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Sovereign Destroyer, watching the blue-green world of Earth rotate slowly beneath them. His confidence had only grown since departing Zephyr Station, bolstered by intelligence reports that confirmed human military capabilities were indeed primitive by galactic standards. The invasion force was massive by any measure. 1,200 warships, ranging from nimble frigates to massive dreadnoughts capable of glassing entire continents. Supporting them were thousands of troop transports, supply vessels, and orbital bombardment platforms. It was overkill on a scale rarely seen in galactic warfare. "Sir, we're detecting some kind of debris field in the outer system," reported his tactical officer, a nervous named. "Multiple objects, metallic composition." Or barely glanced at the readings. "Probably industrial waste or primitive satellites. The humans are known for their careless use of orbital space. Begin the advance." The massive fleet moved inward, their formation designed to intimidate as much as destroy. Each ship bristled with weapons that could reduce mountains to rubble, shields that could deflect asteroid impacts. Against primitive human technology, they might as well have been gods. But as they passed through the debris field, strange things began to happen. Ships reported minor system malfunctions, random power fluctuations, communication static that came and went without apparent cause. The problems were too small to delay the invasion, but troubling enough to put some commanders on edge. "Admiral," called out, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "We're getting some unusual readings from those debris pieces. They appear to be active somehow." Or's attention was focused on the tactical display showing Earth's defenses. Orbital stations, certainly, and what appeared to be a modest fleet of crewed ships. Nothing that couldn't be swept aside in the first wave of attacks. "Ignore the debris. Focus on real threats," he commanded. "Begin bombardment of their military installations." The order rippled through the fleet, and hundreds of ships turned their weapons toward the planet below. Plasma cannons charged, missile tubes loaded, beam weapons focused their deadly energy. In moments, every major human military base would be reduced to smoking craters. That's when the debris field came alive. What the hegemony forces had dismissed as space junk suddenly revealed itself as something far more sinister. Thousands of objects that had appeared dead and abandoned suddenly lit up with power signatures, their hulls unfolding like metallic flowers to reveal weapon systems unlike anything in the galactic databases. What in the void are those things? Or demanded as his tactical display exploded with new contacts. The answer came in the form of a coordinated strike that everything the hegemony knew about warfare. The objects were mines, but not the simple explosive devices that most species employed. These were intelligent, adaptive weapons that had been lying dormant in Earth's outer system for decades, waiting for exactly this moment. Each mine was essentially a miniature warship, equipped with its own targeting systems, propulsion, and a payload designed not to destroy but to disable. They swarmed toward the hegemony fleet like angry insects, too small and numerous for the larger ships to target effectively. "Point defense systems full activation," or ordered, but it was too late. The mines struck with surgical precision, each one targeting critical system nodes that the humans had somehow identified in advance. Instead of explosions, they delivered electromagnetic pulses, computer viruses, and nanoscale disruptors that began systematically dismantling the invaders' technological advantages. Ships throughout the fleet found their weapon systems cycling offline, their shields fluctuating wildly, their navigation computers feeding them false data. It wasn't destruction, it was something worse, a technological plague that spread from ship to ship through their own communication networks. "Sir, we're losing contact with the 7th Squadron," reported, his voice rising in panic. "Their systems appear to be completely compromised." But Or's attention was drawn to something else entirely. From behind Earth's moon, a new signature was emerging, one that made his blood run cold. It was massive, easily matching his own flagship in size, but its design was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The human ship looked more like a weapon than a vessel. Where hegemony warships favored sleek, efficient designs, this was a brutal assemblage of armor plating, weapon turrets, and what appeared to be massive engines mounted in configurations that conventional understanding. "This is Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Defense Force," came a transmission on an open channel. The voice was calm, almost casual, as if discussing the weather rather than the opening moments of a war. "You have entered human space without permission and with obvious hostile intent." Or activated his own transmitter, drawing himself up to his full imposing height. "I am Admiral, or of the Hegemony Third Fleet. You will surrender immediately or face the consequences of resistance. Your primitive technology cannot stand against the might of the galactic community." The human's laugh was like ice water in the Admiral's veins. "Admiral, you're operating under some serious misconceptions. First, our technology isn't primitive, it's just different. Second, you're not facing a primitive world, you're facing a species that has spent its entire existence perfecting the art of war." As if to emphasize her point, the human ship opened fire. What emerged from its weapons wasn't plasma or energy beams, but solid projectiles moving at velocities that shouldn't have been possible. The rounds were massive, each one the size of a small transport, and they struck or shields with an impact that sent shockwaves through the entire ship. But it wasn't just the kinetic force that was devastating. The projectiles were intelligent, each one carrying a payload of smaller munitions that separated just before impact, overwhelming point defenses through sheer volume of fire. "Impossible," or breathed as he watched his supposedly impenetrable shields flicker and fail under the sustained assault. "Those are just kinetic rounds. They shouldn't be able to penetrate our defensive systems." "Report from engineering," came a panicked voice over the communications system. "The projectiles are somehow adapting to our shield frequency. Each impact is tuning the next round to be more effective." Around the flagship, other ships in the fleet were reporting similar problems. The human weapons seemed to learn from each exchange, becoming more effective with every shot. Their projectile technology, dismissed as primitive, was revealing itself to be incredibly sophisticated. More human ships were emerging from concealment now, each one as brutal and efficient in design as the first. They moved with a coordination that spoke of decades of practice, their formations designed not for show but for maximum battlefield effectiveness. "Sir, we're receiving a general communication from the planet's surface," announced. "It's being broadcast on all frequencies." "Put it through," or ordered, hopping to hear surrender terms. Instead, what came through the speakers was music. Human music, wild and primal, with a driving beat that seemed to pulse with aggressive energy. Underneath the music, a human voice spoke with quiet intensity. "This is Earth calling. You came to our system expecting an easy victory over primitives. You thought our technology was crude, our defenses weak. You were wrong on every count." The voice paused, letting the music carry the message for a moment before continuing. "We've been watching your species for decades, studying your tactics, understanding your technology. While you assumed we were harmless, we've been preparing for exactly this moment. Every weapon you carry, every ship in your fleet, every strategy in your databases, we've planned counters for all of it." Around the flagship, more hegemony ships were falling to the coordinated human assault. The technological superiority that had seemed so overwhelming was proving useless against an enemy that had studied them so thoroughly. "You called us primitive," the voice continued. "But has advantages you've forgotten. We still remember that war is chaos, that technology fails, that in the end, victory goes to whoever wants it more." Admiral's ship had closed to extreme range now, its massive bulk dominating the tactical display. When it fired again, the projectiles struck with such force that they actually pushed Or's flagship backward. The impact transmitted through the ship's superstructure like a physical blow. "Admiral," called out desperately, "the fleet is requesting permission to withdraw. We're taking heavy casualties and our weapons are having minimal effect." Or stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His overwhelming force was being systematically dismantled by ships that looked like they'd been built in primitive shipyards. It should have been impossible. But the humans had one more surprise waiting for them. From Earth itself, new signatures began appearing. Not ships, but something else entirely. Massive structures were rising from the planet's surface, revealing themselves to be ground-based weapons of incredible size and power. "Planetary defense cannons coming online," Admiral's voice announced with satisfaction. "You wanted to see our full capabilities. Here they are." The weapons that emerged from Earth's surface were monstrous in scale, each one larger than most starships. When they fired, their projectiles moved so fast they were barely visible, crossing the distance to the hegemony fleet in seconds. The impacts were devastating. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before were shattered by kinetic strikes that delivered more energy than their shields could absorb. The careful formations of the invasion fleet dissolved into chaos as commanders tried desperately to avoid the withering fire from below. Withdraw, all ships, immediate withdrawal, or finally ordered, his pride shattered along with his fleet. But the humans weren't finished with their demonstration. As the surviving hegemony ships tried to flee, they found their escape routes blocked by more human vessels that had been lying in wait. The retreat turned into a rout as ship after ship fell to weapons that every assumption about human capabilities. By the time the survivors finally escaped human space, nearly half the invasion fleet had been destroyed or captured. The remainder limped back to hegemony territory carrying news that would shock the galaxy. The humans weren't primitives. They were predators, and the hegemony had just poked a hive of the deadliest warriors the galaxy had ever seen. In the cantina on Zephyr Station, Al raised a glass to the holographic news feeds showing the aftermath of the failed invasion. The young mercenaries who had laughed at his warnings were nowhere to be seen. The war had begun exactly as he'd predicted, and the galaxy was about to learn what humanity was truly capable of when their survival was at stake. The Hegemony Council chambers had never seen such chaos. Representatives from dozens of species shouted over one another, their universal translators creating a cacophony of panic and recrimination. The holographic displays showed the devastating aftermath of Admiral Orr's failed invasion, and the implications were staggering. High Chancellor, a towering with ceremonial scarring denoting his political rank, called for order with increasingly desperate gestures. The failure at Earth had shaken the very foundations of hegemony power, and everyone in the chamber knew it. "The humans destroyed half our third fleet," declared General, the military commander whose reptilian features were flushed with embarrassment. "Their technology is clearly more advanced than our intelligence suggested." "Advanced?" screeched Ambassador Al from the Confederation. "They used projectile weapons, kinetic rounds against our plasma shields. It shouldn't have been possible." But it was Commodore, one of the few surviving officers from the Earth expedition, who provided the most chilling testimony. His wounds were still fresh, his left arm wrapped in regenerative bandages that couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. "They knew everything," he reported, his words carrying the weight of witnessed horror. "Every ship class, every weapon system, every tactical doctrine. It was like fighting an enemy who had access to our own strategic databases." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If the humans had somehow penetrated hegemony security to such an extent, then no military secret was safe. "How is that possible?" Chancellor demanded. "They've only had interstellar capability for 43 standard years." Commodore's laugh held no humor. "Time enough, apparently. While we saw them as primitives unworthy of attention, they were studying us. Every ship that visited their system, every diplomatic contact, every piece of technology we shared thinking it was harmless. They absorbed it all and turned it into weapons." General's tactical display showed the current disposition of hegemony forces throughout the galaxy. Red warning indicators marked systems where human ships had been detected, their presence growing by the day. "They're not remaining defensive," he announced grimly. "Human forces have been spotted in 17 different systems. They're conducting reconnaissance missions, probing our defenses, mapping our supply lines." "Reconnaissance?" Ambassador Al's voice rose to a near shriek. "They're preparing for invasion." The truth of that statement was more terrifying than anyone in the chamber was willing to admit. The humans weren't content to simply defend there. They were taking the war to their enemies with a speed and efficiency that spoke of long preparation. Reports flooded in from across hegemony space. Human ships appeared without warning, struck military targets with surgical precision, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Their vessels used stealth technology that rendered conventional sensors useless, and their weapons seemed specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in hegemony defensive systems. On the outer rim world of 442, a major supply depot had been destroyed by what witnesses described as invisible attackers. The only evidence of their presence was the complete destruction of the facility and a message left in the debris field. "Your move," was all it said, written in perfect galactic standard. But the most disturbing reports came from captured human soldiers. Unlike other species, who typically surrendered when faced with overwhelming odds, humans seemed to prefer death to capture. When they were taken alive, they displayed a level of tactical knowledge that suggested every soldier was also an intelligence operative. "They interrogated us," reported Captain X, a officer who had been captured during a human raid and later exchanged. But they didn't use torture or coercion. They simply asked questions about our military structure, our technology, our strategic thinking, and somehow they already knew most of the answers. The captain's report included detailed assessments that the humans had made of hegemony capabilities, analyses so accurate they could have been written by the Council's own strategic planners. They understand warfare in ways we've forgotten, he continued. Every aspect of their culture is oriented toward conflict. Their children play games that teach tactical thinking. Their entertainment glorifies sacrifice and strategic brilliance. Even their mathematics curricula include modules on ballistic calculations and explosive chemistry. Chancellor turned to his chief military advisor, Grand Admiral or brother to the disgraced commander who had led the failed invasion. What are our options? The Grand Admiral's response was sobering. Limited, Chancellor. The humans have demonstrated technological capabilities we didn't know they possessed. Their intelligence network appears to be more extensive than our own, and their psychological profile suggests they will never surrender. He activated a holographic display showing human population centers. Earth alone has over 8 billion inhabitants. Each one of them is a potential soldier trained from childhood in competitive thinking and strategic planning. Their entire species has been shaped by constant warfare. Then we must strike now before they can fully mobilize, General interjected. Overwhelming force, multiple fronts, complete annihilation. Grand Admiral Orr's expression was grim. With what forces? We've already committed our largest fleet and lost half of it. Our remaining forces are scattered across the galaxy maintaining order. The humans, meanwhile, have their entire military concentrated in one system, and they've had decades to prepare defenses. The truth that none of them wanted to acknowledge was becoming increasingly clear. The hegemony had picked a fight with an enemy they didn't understand, and now they were discovering that humanity was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Reports continued to arrive, each one worse than the last. Human forces had captured a major hegemony research facility, making off with advanced weapon designs and strategic databases. A convoy carrying supplies to the Rim worlds had vanished entirely, leaving behind only debris and another mocking message. We're learning, this one read, are you? The psychological impact of the human campaign was becoming as devastating as the physical damage. Hegemony forces throughout the galaxy were reporting decreased morale, increased desertion rates, and a growing reluctance to engage human forces even when they held numerical superiority. They're inside our heads, admitted Commander Al of the Fourth Fleet. My crews are seeing human ships that aren't there, jumping at sensor ghosts, assuming every mechanical failure is the result of human sabotage. And perhaps most disturbing of all, they were often right. Human infiltration techniques were proving impossibly sophisticated, with saboteurs appearing and disappearing from secured facilities without triggering any alarms. Their methods were unlike anything in the galactic military databases. They fight like ghosts, reported Security Chief Axe from the fortress world of Sigma Draconis. They appear from nowhere, strike with perfect precision, then vanish before we can respond. It's like fighting an enemy who exists partially outside normal space-time. The reality was simpler, but no less terrifying. Humans had spent perfecting the arts of stealth, misdirection, and asymmetric warfare. What the galaxy saw as primitive cunning was actually the refined product of endless generations of survival-based evolution. Chancellor found himself facing an impossible situation. The hegemony's military superiority had been built on technological advantages and numerical overwhelming force. But the humans had neutralized the first and seemed immune to the second. What do they want? He asked desperately. What are their terms for ending this conflict? The answer came in the form of a transmission that appeared simultaneously on every communication network in hegemony space. The signal seemed to bypass all security protocols, appearing on military channels, civilian broadcasts, and even private communications with equal ease. Admiral Sarah appeared on the holographic displays throughout the galaxy, her expression calm but implacable. Behind her, the bridge of her flagship buzzed with activity as human officers coordinated operations across multiple star systems. People of the galaxy, she began, her voice carrying across billions of receivers. The hegemony came to our world intending genocide. They sought to exterminate our species to claim our resources. This was their choice, not ours. The transmission showed footage from the initial invasion, hegemony ships preparing to bombard Earth's population centers. The images were damning, revealing the true scope of what had been intended. "We do not seek conquest," Admiral continued. "We do not desire your worlds or your resources, but we will not allow our existence to be threatened. The hegemony must learn that humanity cannot be destroyed, cannot be enslaved, and will not be ignored." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle before delivering the final ultimatum. "You have 7 standard days to withdraw all military forces from a 50-light-year radius around our system. Any hegemony vessel found within that zone after the deadline will be destroyed without warning. Any further attempt to attack Earth will result in the systematic dismantling of your entire civilization." The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. In the Hegemony Council chambers, Chancellor stared at the now-blank display with growing dread. 7 days to abandon strategic positions that had taken centuries to establish, 50 light-years of space that contained some of their most important military bases. "She's bluffing," General declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "They don't have the forces to enforce such demands." Grand Admiral Orr's response was quiet but definitive. "Based on what we've seen so far, I wouldn't bet the survival of our civilization on that assumption." Outside the council chambers, across the vast expanse of hegemony space, military commanders were already beginning to calculate withdrawal routes. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that explanation and a level of strategic planning that suggested they were always 3 steps ahead of their enemies. The war that had begun with laughter and overconfidence was rapidly becoming a nightmare that threatened to destroy everything the hegemony had built. And somewhere in space, Al the veteran was probably laughing, having predicted exactly this outcome. The humans had kept their promise. They had fought with a ferocity that haunted the dreams of their enemies. The galaxy was learning, perhaps too late, that some species were too dangerous to threaten. The countdown to the deadline had begun, and everyone knew that humanity would keep their word, just as they had kept every other promise they had made since the war began.